Hello and welcome to the 160th of a second photography podcast. In this episode, I'm talking to Carl about being a wedding photographer. So, Carl, can you just introduce yourself briefly?
Hi, I'm Carl from 166 Photography. I've been a wedding photographer for about 6 years now, and apart from that, my background has always been in skateboarding and music photography.
Thanks, Carl. Now, how did you get into photography?
Into photography is one of those weird things. I used to make films, like I used to make a lot of skateboard videos growing up. That's the first reason I got into anything creative. Started traveling around with friends as I went to college and stuff. I didn't always want to take my video camera, so I went to a charity shop and just picked up a random, cheap as you like, automatic old film camera, and then started taking photos and following my friends around like that, sort of documenting our trips to go see bands and things like that. And then from there, it grew further and further to the point that I asked my parents if I could have some money towards a DSLR if I did one of my GCSEs. Not even a DSLR, unfortunately, an SLR. So I asked my parents for some money towards an SLR for my 16th birthday. Should I do one of my GCSEs? And I did okay. They gave me some money and I'd been saving. So it became a case of once I got that, I was hooked.
So, you started in photography. How did you make the transition to a wedding photographer, particularly from a skateboarding background?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I started in wedding photography is the most family story I think ever. I was never going to do wedding photography. It was kind of the bottom of my list of priorities. So from there, it got to a point where my cousin was getting married, and she said, "Look, we do our wedding photography." And I was like, "Well, no, I don't. I'm a music photographer. I'm a skateboarding photographer, and kind of that's the fields I work in. I don't really want to do weddings." And from there, it kind of, she said, "Oh, well, I'd really love it," and sort of twisted my arm a little bit. And I was like, "No, honestly, I'm really will." But then her dad, my uncle, obviously, spoke to my dad. And they both started applying the thumb screws from either side. And she kept messaging me and kind of saying, "Look, I know you're not a wedding photographer. We don't want you to capture it like a normal wedding photographer. We just wouldn't capture it as you would." And eventually it's kind of one of those where I gave into pressure and just ended up sort of giving it a go, because it was either that or hear about it for months from every member of my family that why didn't I do it. So I just kind of came and shot their wedding and absolutely loved it. And kind of from there, it's one of those things actually I was hooked on it.
So, compared to the other photography genres that you've worked in, is wedding photography a more stable income, or does it not matter, do you think?
Definitely more stable income. Well, I say that obviously 2020 and this pandemic has wiped out everything I've done for the last 12 months. But I mean, it is a stable income in terms of wedding photography versus, say, music photography or skateboarding photography. They're very much kind of, unless you're top of the game, it's a very much begging for scraps kind of. Obviously, to try and move out of teaching, which is what my background was, into doing it full time, weddings were obviously going to be a simpler option than trying to chase the dream of bands, especially as I was getting older and kind of family responsibilities and things like that.
I'm an amateur photographer. I've got a good DSLR. I've got a tripod. I've got a flash. Can I just become a good wedding photographer, or is it not quite that easy?
It's that thing. It's the reason that I kind of find that I've been successful in the transition to wedding photography isn't that I've got a good camera and I can take a good photo in certain conditions. It's a Marmite kind of thing. It's, you'll either love it or you'll hate it, because you can take a good photo of a nice wildlife scene that you could put two people in. That doesn't make you a wedding photographer. Because you can work with flash, that doesn't make you a wedding photographer. The thing that helped me most transitioning from doing music and stuff is knowing my camera inside out. Like, I knew what would happen if I pressed this button, what would happen if I switched the speed by 3 clicks. I knew exactly where to find that. I knew how to change ISO without looking at the camera. It's just kind of, you need to be absolutely on top of your game, and especially shooting in low light, because even on the bright sunny days, a church setting can be literally the darkest place you'll ever shoot, or it feels like it at times. And the most important thing to anybody out there who's thinking of going into wedding photography and shooting a wedding, please, if you don't listen to anything else I ever say, get a backup camera body at least, and if you can, a backup lens. Because if something goes wrong on that day and that camera fails, unfortunately, nobody's going to reshoot their wedding because your camera body went wrong. and all you're going to do is end up in a world of pain, and it just is going to be a hellish thing all round that'll probably end up in one of the papers. So just beware, if you are going to start getting into it, you need backup gear, and you ideally need bodies that shoot 2 cards so you can back up your images.
I've actually done a bit of wedding photography. I tried it out. After doing some wedding shoots, I thought it's not for me. And one of the reasons I thought it's not for me is because I'm by no means a people person. I'm quite an introvert. I found it was really difficult to corral people, to get people into the right places, particularly when they've been drinking. I felt quite awkward, sort of invading people to take a photo. How do you cope with that, or is that not a problem for you at all?
It's a weird thing. I don't tend to think about it. And in terms of the pressure that I used to be under with music, I think actually in some ways it's less. With music photography, I had 3 songs, no flash, completely at the mercy of the lighting person for that night. And I had to get usable images in color because they wouldn't accept black and white. So you're kind of, that to me is a lot more pressure than the church ceremony goes on for sort of 30, 40 minutes up to an hour kind of thing. And to me, that's a lot more time. So that side of the pressure, capturing the shot, is a lot easier again because of my background. And the other pressures, yes, my cards could fail, my cameras could fail. I have as many backups as I think I need. And it's just one of those things you can't think about it too much when you get into it. If you did, you just end up kneeling on the floor and rocking backwards and forwards, I think.
Thank you very much. Now, you talked about working in a documentary style. How do you stay sort of in the shadows and not get in the way but capture the shot? Do you use telephoto lenses? How do you not get in the way and become an intrusion while getting candid shots and documentary shots?
I mean, I'm very similar. I am an introvert. I don't like really talking, especially to large groups of people. But for 95+% of my day, I shoot in a documentary style, so I don't really interact with hardly anybody in the wedding party. I'm more like a fly on the wall for most of the day. So for a lot of the day, it doesn't really affect me so much, and couples book me because of my style. But I do kind of group shots because obviously, even though I shoot in a documentary style, there's always people who want that photo for their grandparents to hang on the wall. And I kind of have to go back into my teacher mode from sort of previous life as well, and just kind of shout out for the right people and all the rest of it, and always understand that actually people will generally do as they're told, even if they're drunk, because if they don't, they'll get told off by somebody's parents. So again, I think capturing majority of the day in a documentary style for me is the way that I kind of don't have to deal with that side of it so much, being an introvert myself. Fake it till you make it almost when it comes to group shots, and that's how I tend to get through that day. In terms of shooting, again, 90% of my day is a 35mm prime and an 85mm prime. Again, just because I like shallow depth field for keeping people a specific focus. And I also kind of do use 7-200 in the church, which again you just normally place in a certain area but I tend to shoot wide. I tend to shoot 35 quite a lot of the time and try and get in close to people. And I think it's that thing of, again, you know, people will kind of notice you're there, but again, you're not the focus of the day. If you're stood within 3 feet of somebody and I stood within 3 feet of somebody, you're just not going to exist. And I know that sounds really weird, being a 6'2", like 20+ stone guy, that I melt into the background compared to a bride. But it's just that thing. They aren't there for you. They're there for other people. So they're looking for their friends. They're looking for their family members. And even though you're there, you do sort of melt into the background in the way that you kind of act around them. You don't kind of pull them aside to smile and cheese and all the rest of it. You just keep quiet. You kind of walk the room and just do it that way.
And what sort of dress do you wear? How do you dress for a wedding if you're trying to melt in and not be noticeable? Do you go in t-shirts? Do you go in a suit? How do you do it?
I mean, personally, I dress just as any wedding guest would. I tend not to wear a tie because, again, with camera structure on my neck, that can get a bit restrictive. And obviously, with most weddings being towards the summertime, I generally don't wear a blazer or a full suit. But again, I just try and dress like the average wedding guest would. So nice shoes. And again, that's the top tip, is if you are doing weddings, get some shoes that are really comfortable, because you're going to be on your feet a lot of the time. So comfortable shoes, a nice pair of trousers and a nice shirt. And when you've got those on, you'll blend in with about 90% of the guests around you. So again, it's just dress like a guest would as much as you can comfortably do. And that will also help you kind of A, look smart, and B, blend in. I haven't seen other photographers, but I've worked with videographers who've had their sort of company polo shirt and that kind of thing. And to me, they stick out like a sore thumb. So as I scan a room, you can see the person wearing a polo shirt when everyone else is wearing shirts and ties. So again, I think it's important for my style anyway, at least, to be able to blend in and kind of not be noticed around guests until I've got a camera up at my face.
Speaking of videographers, do you ever get asked to do a bit of both? Do you ever get asked to do hybrid? Do your clients ever say, we're not hiring a videographer, can you do it as well?
They don't. And again, personally, it's becoming more popular, the whole hybrid approach. But I'm one of those people, like, I'm a perfectionist in what I do. And if I'm shooting video, which again, obviously, before photography, I used to do some of. If I'm shooting video, I want to be fully engaged in shooting video. And if I'm shooting photography, I want to be fully engaged in shooting photography. I make it clear to my clients that I am there to be a photographer. If you want me to shoot a bit of video, I will shoot it, but it's not going to be as beautiful as hiring a videographer in that field who I can recommend to them and stuff and say, look, these are the guys you need because they need to capture a lot of footage to be able to have like a 3, 4, 5 minute clip. It takes an amazing amount of footage. And again, it's one of those things you have to educate your couples that those things that they see on YouTube that look absolutely beautiful and they're about 5 minutes long have taken all day to shoot.
I guess a lot of it is educating the client when you sit down and first meet them.
Yeah, I think education is key. And I think that's where a lot of problems can stem from. And I think you've got to be honest with your couples. You've got to kind of tell them exactly what you are willing and aren't willing to do. And if that means losing clients, you have to lose those clients. It's a really hard thing, especially when it's what you rely on to put food on your table, is that you have to say no sometimes and you have to be firm sometimes. And again, that's something that a lot of people who are starting in wedding photography do sometimes make the mistake of trying to be accommodating to everything. And I can't say I haven't done those kind of things in the past, but you do quickly learn that you need to go to your client and say, this is what I do, because a lot of the couples as well, this is their first ever wedding. Like, sort of, again, for me, all of my couples, it's their first time getting married. So they don't necessarily know. And obviously they don't want to appear uneducated to photographers because they don't want to sit you naive and get taken advantage of. So it kind of becomes that game of, if you're not careful, people end up second guessing each other. So I think the best thing I can say is to be clear with your couples, talk to them about how you work, what will happen, when they can expect stuff. And if that isn't for them, that isn't for them. Try not to take it personally and just accept they've gone another route.
I picked up on some key things that you've said there that are really enlightening. The first one is most people, it's their first go of this. It's generally their first marriage and they haven't done it before, which is a really key thing. But the second thing is just the importance of setting expectations with your clients. That's probably one of the biggest business skills you need, I'm guessing.
I think it is, no matter what genre of photography you get into, I think it's always letting the client know exactly when they can expect stuff. I mean, I always say that my photos will take up to 6 weeks to deliver. Now, 99.9% of the time, they're delivered in just over a month at the latest. But if I said they're delivered in a month, and for one couple I took a month and 1 day, for some couples that would be absolutely devastating. And I will be the worst wedding photographer, my review will be terrible. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things, isn't it? It's educating and working with your clients to set expectations in any business really is the key to success, in my opinion.
And do you live and die by your last wedding review?
No, I've been lucky because all of my couples have always been absolutely amazing, and I've got, touch wood, fingers crossed and everything else, all 5 stars in my reviews. But again, if it's really hard sometimes not to take things personally. But again, if people aren't happy with their photos, that's just one of those things. I think it's a case of there's nothing you can do at that point, because weddings can't, unlike sort of portraits or commercial work, can't be repeated. There is nothing you can do. As long as you've delivered a solid set of work that's within your style and that you're happy with, then I think sometimes, unfortunately, there is going to be sort of a review that's maybe not as complimentary as you would like. And again, it's just one of those things you just got to take it on the chin.
Let's just go through a hypothetical situation. You meet with clients, and we'll assume this isn't in the COVID world. You meet with clients, they say, now we want pictures up on Facebook during the wedding day. During the wedding day, there's a couple of amateur photographers around, and there's lots of people taking pictures with smartphones. How have those recent things affected wedding photography?
Cell phones are a bit of a sort of a pain especially during the ceremony. At the end, like as the couple come sort of down the aisle and out of the church, it just feels like everybody and their uncle has got a cell phone out trying to sort of get the image. And again, luckily, I employ a tactic of just ignorance and using my size to my advantage sometimes, where I stay sort of around 6 foot maximum away from the couple and just walk backwards down the aisle. And again, because of that, I can get the shot using a 35, gives a nice sort of shot of them sort of come down the aisle. And again, I haven't got that many people around me because they've moved to let me pass, so I can just get those shots without the phones present. In terms of the wider day, again, I have absolutely no issue with sort of the whole cell phone thing. I know some photographers do and are very purists. I've always said I can capture you as you truly are because I shoot in a documentary, so I'll capture you being spontaneous. I'll capture you kind of smiling like you normally do rather than posing for a camera. But I can't capture groups of friends in the same way that friends within that group can, if you see what I mean. So I know with my own friends, I can catch photos of them and having a laugh and having a joke and being their normal stupid selves kind of thing when you're at a wedding or something like that. But a wedding photographer can never get into that closeness of the group sometimes. So again, I think those images are really important, and I think actually they can add to a wedding album. It's kind of a nice couple of pages at the end, just of friends and family sort of cell phone snaps. Make a really nice addition just to get those really personal kind of moments added to the main album. In terms of me posting Facebook on the day, again, that's something that with my couples, I say that I just don't do that. I shoot raw, my photos take editing, and I want to make sure that the stuff that does go out is quality they will love. So again, that's part of that education that for me, that's something I don't do. I have toyed with the idea, and I've heard of sort of some wedding photographers who, while the meal's going on, having a break, they start ingesting cards into their laptops and start culling down an edit already, and then get a few photos from the day and put them onto a like one of those picture frame devices run off a small battery, and leave that playing at the wedding for other guests to see and stuff. I don't want to rush anything, and I think it's a case of wedding shouldn't be about Facebook first. Most of my couples don't tend to ask for that. I think, again, that's the way I market and the way I talk to my couples when I sort of meet with them and stuff, that we know whether we're going to be the right fit or not. Because, again, I have sort of things that I don't agree to, such as posting the same day on Facebook for the couple and all those kind of things, just because that's not who I am.
And how do you cope with other amateur photographers or people with camcorders? Do they stand in your way? You know, how do you cope with that?
It's very much the same as sort of the whole phone thing. And I think obviously phones now are much more prevalent and sort of much more out there than the amateur photographer or somebody with a camcorder. And again, I think it's that firm but respectful. If somebody is in your way, it's just a case of having to, again, become firm but respectful and just say, look, I'm really sorry. I know you want to get a photo, but I need to get this photo first. Obviously, I'm the paid photographer. Can you just give me 2 minutes, please? And just being polite and saying thank you and giving them their couple of moments to get the photograph after you've got the shot. By doing that, that gives you what you need to be able to get the shot without upsetting people. And it's a really simple thing. And it's just, again, it's that firm but fair. I need to get the shot, please, but I'll give you 2 minutes afterwards. Is that okay? And obviously, again, 99.999% of the time, everybody's going to say, of course it is. And if they say it doesn't, you kind of have to work around it from there. But again, I'm lucky I've never had that happen personally, but I have heard of people, especially as the evening's gone on, where other photographers have got a bit more kind of, no, I need to get the shot as well. I'm photographing too. You just have to deal with it.
You've given a really good expose so far in this podcast of what it's like to be a wedding photographer, what you do, how you do it. But can you describe a typical wedding shoot that you would do, say, on a Saturday?
So a typical wedding day for me starts the night before. So it's a case of making sure the batteries are charged, making sure that everything's in the right place within my camera bags, my ironing for the shirt and everything like that is done the night before. Then the wedding day itself, again, it's a case of start with a good breakfast for me to make sure that I can last, because again, sometimes grabbing a drink, grabbing food can be very sporadic. So make sure in the morning you have a nice sort of decent breakfast. A big glass of water is always a good tip for those going into it. Make sure you drink plenty of water as you're going to the shoot, because you never know when you're going to be able to get that through the day. Moving on to arriving, I tend to arrive sort of between 90 minutes and 2 hours before the bride sort of heads to the church. So again, it's then just making introductions and saying hello to everyone, figuring out who everyone is within the wedding party and stuff, because obviously you don't meet those people until that morning. And then it's just a case of getting to work. So from there, you're capturing the things at home, you're capturing the bride sort of getting ready and everything like that. Just kind of making small talk with people as well during time. So kind of the bridesmaids, the mother of the bride and everything else. You just make that small talk because, again, they're the people that you can rely on later in the day. So if you're nice, if you're charming to them first thing, if you do need them later in the day, it makes your job a lot easier. From there, I shoot as a solo photographer. I have an assistant, which is also my wife, luckily for me, who helps me through the day, but she doesn't generally shoot. So it's not like some duo photographers where they have one person with the bride, one person with the groom. And again, depending on what's been requested, I sometimes spend a little bit of time with the bride and dip over to see the groom if he's close by, and then come back to get the dress going on and stuff. Or more generally, I will kind of focus on the bride and that side of thing at the house. And then after the bride's got into the dress, I will then head to the church to capture the groom kind of with the best man and all the rest of it before the event, and then capture guests arriving. Obviously, from there, you have the ceremony. Confetti usually gets thrown after that. That's the part of the day that's the most stressful. Up to there, it's the really stressful part because obviously that's part that you really have only got one shot at. If you need to do a group shot and it doesn't work, you can do it later in the day. But the ceremony, obviously, is the part you must capture and you must nail. And it does become easier if you do more of it. But it's the one thing that even now is sometimes a little bit, you need to make sure you get this right. You still build yourself up to it. From there, obviously, you're then into the rest of the day, the hugs and the stuff at the church. You then travel to the reception venue. Again, capturing guests arriving, capturing guests having a drink and a chat. In terms of my style, that's what I find I get some of the nicest photos, because not only will the bride and groom be kind of hugging everyone around, you'll also see some guests who haven't seen each other in a long time kind of laughing and joking and all the rest of it. So there's really expressive moments to capture there. Then, obviously, to go through from there, it ends up at the wedding breakfast, which is when I always take my break as well. Again, I think it's important that you do get that chance just to recharge your batteries, not literally, but figuratively. In my opinion, there's only ever one great photo of somebody eating food, and that's a photo by Mick Rock of David Bowie eating a fried breakfast on a train. That is the only photo, as far as I'm concerned, in the history of photography of somebody eating that looks good. So there is no point trying to take photos of people during the meal. Obviously, by then as well, it's a case of, if I haven't already, changed cards, changed batteries, because again, it's always important to have several backup batteries. Batteries will usually last till the wedding breakfast, which is then when I automatically just change them when I'm having my break, put new memory cards in again, so I know for the rest of the evening I've not got to worry unless there's a failure about sort of anything to do with the cameras. And then the night goes on from there. Obviously there's speeches to capture and everything else, and I think it kind of, that's when it starts to sometimes become a little bit tiring. If it's been a long hot day, kind of as you get past the speeches and you're waiting for the first dance and everything else and you're still capturing everybody there, that can be the part when it becomes a bit tiring. So if you started at sort of 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, it's now kind of 9:30 in the evening, that's when it can be a little bit sort of harder to push yourself through those last few hours. But again, once the music comes on and the first dance is there, it almost re-energizes you. It's kind of, there is a little bit of a lull after speeches just before the first dance, usually in any wedding, either as a guest or a photographer. But then when that music comes on the dance floor and you see the couple there having that first dance, again, that's the most magical moment, I think, is seeing them have that first dance, whether that be sort of something that's tried to be choreographed and ends up being some sort of full-on set piece, or whether that's the awkward shuffle of, we really don't like dancing, not very good at it, but we love each other and we want to dance to this song. That's sort of one of the magical moments. And for me, that's almost like it gives me a second wind. And then obviously everybody gets on the dance floor and you can get some great sort of shots of people having fun on the dance floor and obviously strutting their stuff, shall we say. By that time, it's kind of, that's when you just gently slip out, you absolutely exhausted, and leave the couple to enjoy the rest of their evening.
I was going to ask about when you finish. Is when you finish dependent upon the package people have picked, or do you always just do a whole day and go to the end of the dancing?
I have two packages, so I just do either up to the wedding breakfast or I do kind of all day. and up to and after first dance. Almost every couple I've ever had has booked me for the whole day. And again, I think it's kind of, in terms of time, I normally say first dance, and I might stay for a couple of songs. But again, I generally stay that extra half hour just to get some kind of nice shots of everybody by that time has let their hair fully down. So mothers who sometimes have been worried about things all day have suddenly let their hair down because the first dance is done. There's nothing more that can possibly go wrong, if you see what I mean. So everybody by that point has let their hair down. You catch some really nice moments. So I always try and stay for a good half hour after the first dance, and that will be when I go. Again, if they want, some couples sort of have talked about booking me for the whole evening until the very, very end, which again is something that does come as an extra cost. But I generally tend to work till after first dance.
So let's talk about timings in your week now. So Friday you pack your bag and you get ready. Saturday you're out all day, and it sounds like it really is all day shooting. Get back, you must be very tired, and now you've got the editing and you've got admin tasks and you've got promotion and you must have other things to do. How do you structure your week, and when do you get time off?
In terms of the week, it doesn't really end getting home Saturday night. What I do is I always go via a second location and drop my backup cards off. So I shoot cameras with two cards. I don't go straight home. I go to a second location and drop off my backup memory cards. Again, it's that thing of just in case. So I drop them off at my second location. From there, I then go home and ingest the cards straight into the computer. From there, I then have to wait for them to finish, which is when I'm normally having a cup of tea. I'd love to say I have a cold beer and all the rest of it, but actually all I want generally at that time is just a nice warm cup of tea. I let the cards go into the computer. I then start backing them up to my secondary hard drives, which again that's when I finish. When they've started to copy across to the backup hard drive, that's when my night's finished. And obviously I've got a cloud backup system on top of that. So again, it's kind of that just automatically starts doing its thing. Sort of Sunday, I always take the Sunday after a wedding off because I'm just exhausted. And also it's kind of that emotionally invested in the day still. So it's hard to kind of take a step back and take a breath from everything if you start editing straight away. I'll leave it a couple of days, 3 days maybe, before I even look at the images. Again, just to kind of not de-stress from that wedding, but just kind of let it sort of wash over me, get my energy back a little bit and feel ready to get into the editing, because I think it's important that you don't do any editing of things like this when you feel tired or you feel kind of washed out from something. And I think that by having that sort of day or two to relax is just really important. And then I will tend to sort of do the first picks and the first selections within that first week after the wedding. And then from there, editing, I will do in small batches. Again, I know some photographers and some friends who sit there one day and just go through it and take one whole day and just smash it out. Personally, again, I kind of like to take it in small batches so that I can go back and feel fresh about something and just kind of do that a few hours here, a few hours there. And again, for me, it's normally about 3 to 4 sessions to do a wedding, which again will just take place dotted throughout the week in 2 to 3 hour blocks. Other than that, it's kind of the marketing and stuff like that is one of those big tasks. I'm going to be brutally honest, I don't like constantly having to post to Facebook and Instagram, but I know it's kind of one of those things that is required now of photographers. So for me, that's my Monday morning task. It's generally on a Monday morning, I will sit and I will pre-populate my sort of 4 to 5 posts for that week on both platforms, so that I know, again, that's the job that I like doing sort of the least personally, is writing Facebook posts. So I do those in a block and get those out of the way, so that then they automatically sort of pop up at a set time on a set day. And again, once they're up and people comment and stuff, I like and enjoy that part of it. It's just the kind of trying to think of what hashtags you need to put in and all those kind of things. I just find a bit laborious sometimes. My other main method of marketing personally is speaking with and working with other wedding vendors, so style shoots and things like that, and just going to grab coffee with people. I love doing that. I love sort of meeting those new venues and those new dress shops and dress designers and florists and all those kind of things. Again, they sort of become friends as you go through and make your way in this world. So again, it's almost like you've both got a common interest. You both kind of are happy to talk to each other. So it's just like going and having a coffee. So to me, that's the side of it like work. I also still do a little bit of teaching. I've always taught media studies when I was a teacher. I used to teach IT, but I started to do a little bit of media studies, because for me, that was the one thing when I was at school. I always wanted to do media. I always wanted to be a photographer or a filmmaker. As you can imagine, growing up in rural Lincolnshire, schools and families' kind of response to that was like, don't be so stupid. You live in flipping Lincolnshire. Like, nobody's going to make films or do anything like that around here. Don't be so stupid. Get a proper job. And that's always been my love of media studies and teaching and photography, because I like to give kids the opportunity to access those things and not have to complete some of the barriers that I came up against growing up. So I still do a little bit of teaching of media studies to sixth form students, which again I do on a Thursday and Friday. So again, that takes some of my time up for the week. So yeah, I mean, to circle the long way around to your original question, some weeks you don't get a break whatsoever because you're always busy. Other weeks, especially as you go into the winter months and there's not weddings every weekend, you do kind of get a good time to relax and de-stress kind of things. But when you're in wedding season and you kind of do a lot of weddings, it becomes that thing of you are constantly busy. You kind of have to face it. It's almost like a farmer. Again, being Lincolnshire, I have to bring it back to farming. But it's almost like a farmer. When it's harvest time, you know you're going to be working a lot of hours. You know you're going to be working really hard. And that's when you're going to make sort of majority. But then in the winter months, you do get to relax a little bit more. You do get to kind of enjoy life a little bit more. And I think it's very similar for wedding photographers.
Thank you. That's a really in-depth look at not only your week and what you do, but also the seasons and working around the wedding seasons. And it's lovely that you linked it to the harvest for a farmer. That's great. Now, what are the best parts about being a wedding photographer?
The best parts are getting to be close and intimate with people on the happiest day of their lives. I think that's something really special and something that I never have taken for granted. It's kind of, you get to be part of that real inner circle. You see things that not even their closest friends outside of the wedding party will see on that day. And it's beautiful to capture that excitement and that emotion that you get to see on a wedding day. Like it's always loved that part of it, being part of those emotions of somebody that kind of has picked you for the job is an awesome privilege. I always think of it as a privilege that I've been asked to be part of that inner circle of the day. I do get to work around my own schedule. I know that I'll be working Saturday, but the rest of the week I can kind of create my own schedule around everybody and everything. And again, I think it's just that thing of you get to hang out with people on a happy day and you get to sort of capture them and make their memories for other people. I think that's an important factor as well, making memories for people. Because obviously, like my own wedding, my memories of the exact day fade as the years go on a little bit. But I open my wedding album, and again, it brings everything back. And I think that's going to be me for several people. And again, being very sentimental about the whole thing, it's kind of, I'm going to be dead and gone in the future, but my work will live on through those families telling stories. And I think that's a huge thing for me personally, is the fact that I'm part of family stories through, not sort of directly, but obviously when they grab their wedding album and say, oh, our photographer, look what he did, as they to their grandchildren and stuff, look, this is what we got married. I can't wait for that part. I think it's the old thing. It's kind of similar why I went into teaching. I always wanted to be a rock and roll star when I was a kid. I always wanted to be remembered forever, and kind of teaching is allowing me to live beyond my death, and taking photographs is allowing me to live beyond my own years kind of thing. I'm going to be part of somebody's future, part of something they'll always remember fondly.
And you can probably guess what the next question is going to be from me. What's the worst part of the job?
The worst part of the job, Saturdays in summer can be a sort of a downer sometimes when friends are having barbecues or parties and things like that, and obviously you're going to work. There's no way to get around that. That can sometimes be something that sucks. Again, long hours, but generally I don't mind those. It is a long day, and to a lot of people it's incredibly stressful. I think as I do, the more I do it, the kind of stress is still there, but you cope with it better, if you see what I mean. But long days and sort of Saturdays are the two things that you have to kind of not really sacrifice, because I get so much more out of working those days. But yeah, I think it's kind of, the long days can be hard. And again, I think from a photography perspective, I think it's frustrating seeing people pop up cut price photographers. So photographers who do all day for sort of £400 or something like that, and everything. And it's kind of, that can be hard from a personal standpoint. It can be hard to see that you're now starting to compete with people who you will never be able to compete with, because they're not having to put food on their table with their prices. They're just doing it to make a little bit of pocket money. And again, I think seeing the industry have more and more people entering it through the digital age and stuff, I think that is something that's really hard to sometimes see and deal with. But again, I think you have to concentrate on yourself. I think trying to concentrate on other people and what they're doing is only going to lead to driving you mad, because unfortunately you can't control other people. So I think that would probably be about it.
Thank you. Now, last question. You've inspired one of our listeners who has listened to this podcast to become a wedding photographer or consider it. How do you get into being a wedding photographer, and are there any tips for success you would give them?
In terms of really getting into it, I think if you want to get into it, try and make sure your photography game is strong. Like, make sure you're inside out and everything else. And then try and reach out to photographers to see if they'll accept you as a second shooter. And again, I didn't do that personally, but again, I know photographers who have said it can be really soul destroying that you email photographers all the time and they don't reply to you. They kind of do a thanks, but no thanks. It's hard to keep going with that route. But I think working with somebody else where you're sort of a second or even third shooter in some cases, I think is a really important in route to doing it. I think it's kind of trying to go out there and do it completely on your own is really hard and make mistakes. And I think it's kind of, that's the kind of thing of being able to do it as sort of a third shooter or a second shooter. You can make those mistakes because you know somebody else has got it covered. If it's all on you and you make those mistakes, there's a world of pain coming your way. So that's how I would suggest that you kind of start to get into wedding photography. Tips for success. I mean, again, it's really hard to give any specific tips, but I mean, I think I've already said it. Know your camera inside out. Be prepared to backside off and be able to work under a massive variety of conditions. So you'll be working in incredibly dark environments, so you need to know how to work your ISO down at that level and sort of balance everything out there. Straight from there, you're going outside into absolute bright sunshine. So again, it's kind of remembering that then you need to try and get people into shade to avoid the harsh shadows on their face and stuff like that. Then as you go into the evening, you will portraits of the bride and groom, so then you need to become almost an off-camera flash photographer to really get portraits that are absolutely stunning. Just get used to being able to use off-camera flash. And then you become a night photographer when everyone gets on the dance floor. So it's kind of, there's a wide variety of skills you need, so make sure you shoot and experiment and try as much as you can. For the love of everyone you're going to photograph, make sure you're confident of doing those before you accept a wedding, because as we sort of alluded to right at the very start of this, there is no second chances. If you make an absolute mess of it, going to leave a scar on somebody's life. And I know that sounds really dramatic, but if this goes really badly wrong, there's going to be the rest of their life, they're going to remember the wedding day and the photographer who cocked everything up. So just don't be that guy. Get experience if you can, and make sure that you kind of feel confident and you're happy with it. And again, I think like you said, when you sort of shot a few weddings and realised it wasn't for you, I think a lot of people will do that and think, oh, weddings, you get a lot of money for one day's work. But then when you kind of see behind the curtain, and it's not one day's work, it's all the editing and everything else that goes with it. It's all the prep, it's all the meetings, it's all the everything else into it. I think it will be a case of you'll either realise it and fall in love with it, or you'll kind of 180 and walk out the door. So get experience as a second shooter or third shooter if you can, and then make sure that you just know what you think. And again, I've said this before, but for God's sake, have backups of everything you use on the day, because if something goes wrong and you can't grab another camera and pretend like nothing's happened, that's the worst feeling in the world, I would imagine. Never had it happen, but I've heard the stories. So again, make sure the number one top tip is to make sure you have backup equipment, because if you don't and something goes wrong, you're screwed.
And on that note of being screwed, we're going to finish the podcast. Carl, where can listeners find more about you if they want to?
166photography.co.uk. I am on all socials, Twitter less than the rest, but again, find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram, just searching 166 Photography. But the best place I like to send people is towards my website.
And of course, all those links will be in this show's description. So I'd like to say thank you to Carl, and I'd like to say thank you to you, the listener, for listening. Thank you. Goodbye.